Now that the entire God Valley incident has been revealed, we can finally talk about it from a new angle. Not as a hyped event we spent years waiting for, but as something we can actually evaluate within the story. For so long, all we had were the headlines. Roger and Garp teamed up, the Rocks pirates with a young Whitebeard, Kaido and Big Mom defeated, Captain Rocks supposedly aimed to become the king of the world, and the island of God Valley vanished from history. That tiny collection of facts made it feel like one of the most important turning points in all of One Piece. And now that we have the complete picture, the question is, was the God Valley incident good or bad within the fabric of the series as a whole? Whether this flashback actually delivered on what it needed to, what we expected it to. And to figure that out, we have to look at how it works on several levels at once, as a historical account, as the origin point for multiple future legends, as a long-teased legendary event that ultimately becomes a character-driven drama, and as a source of thematic weight that connects directly to what's happening in the present timeline. One of the biggest surprises of this God Valley flashback is how this legendary incident came about. Kuma's flashback during the Egghead Island arc already exposed us to the extent of the cruelty of God Valley as being the unfortunate target of the World Nobles native hunting competition. Before becoming a battlefield, God Valley was chosen as a custom-built playground for the Celestial Dragons, for the latest installment of a long-held tradition of cruelty dressed up as entertainment. Under the flimsy excuse that the island's very name is an insult to the gods, lies deeper, darker reasons for why God Valley was chosen. Discovered by Garling, in reality, it was chosen as punishment for their refusal to join the world government, for them storing a wealth of resources, and also being the home to the legendary Davy family. But we were still very much in the dark as to why this would prompt a showdown between the biggest names in the One Piece world. And the answer was something none of us could have ever expected: Shakuyaku. The former Amazon Lily Empress being captured and offered up as a prize served as the unexpected emotional trigger for the pirates' involvement in this affair. She was beloved by all pirates, prompting a mass rescue mission when news got out about her capture, which also nicely tied in Ginny's involvement in the story. Seeing an entire era of pirates rush to God Valley because of Shaki instantly tells you just how valued she was. And this is also where one of the most unexpected fandom reactions popped up, because the moment Shaki was revealed to be a central figure within the flashback prompted a loud section of the fanbase to make it to my comment section, some people loudly complaining that it made legends like Roger, Whitebeard and Rocks appear as simps, and disregarding my personal opinion that this sort of setup perfectly fits One Piece. But more clearly, more importantly, this isn't a story about people chasing Shaki. It's a story about multiple disasters colliding at the exact same moment, with Shaki being one crucial piece in a much larger chain of political cruelty, personal vendettas, and world government manipulation. If anything, her role highlights just how messy and complex how large this event really was, especially as we would find out that Rocks has a secret, more heartfelt reason to care. His crew can treat this as a chaotic battle for Shaki's affection, a raid for treasure and devil fruits. But for him, this was a rescue mission for his hidden family, his wife Eris and their child Teach. They were on God Valley under the protection of the Davy clan. The moment the native hunt was announced and the target was placed on his literal home, that same target was placed on his family. By the time we get to God Valley, Oda had already done a great job of humanizing Rocks Dizabek, providing a strong narrative thread of the whole event from start to finish. And on top of that, we get the lore reveal that reveals his true name is Davy Dizabek, a detail that reshapes how we understand his place in the world and everything he's done leading up to this moment. The Roger pirates, on the other hand, head to the island for a much simpler motive. Roger wants to save Shaki. That's it. They're treasures that they're more than happy to grab on the side, but the main point is saving a friend, a woman they've all become a little obsessed with. While their reasons amount to a comically unusual motive for someone of Roger's stature, amidst all the politics and lore, Roger's side of things is built around a very direct emotional goal. And then you have the Marines. Garp is technically summoned to protect the Celestial Dragons, dragons, but the only thing that actually convinces him to go is hearing Roger is also gonna be on the island. His decision boils down to chasing a rival he refuses to ignore, something we already knew about Garp. But the more surprising reveal, that's the involvement of Garp's son. Dragon was there as a marine in a completely different headspace. He's a young cadet still buying into the system, sent down with the idea that this is some kind of high-level training exercise. Dragon's presence gives the entire incident a more human perspective, because unlike the legends clashing around him, he isn't strong enough to shape the battlefield through force. What he can do is serve as the anchor of humanity inside an event that's about to spiral into absolute cruelty. And Garling sits at the center of the Celestial Dragon setup. As the instigator who has recommended God Valley as the next location of the hunting games, Oda portrays him as someone who is completely comfortable in this environment, not just participating in the cruelty, but thriving in it. His inhumanity reaches new heights when he kills the mother of his own children before their very eyes as he sets out to win himself a new bride. There's a sense that everything happening on God Valley is not abnormal to him. For Garling, this isn't a nightmare, it's routine. And from the viewpoint of the God Valley victims, we have Teach, a young boy confronted with the world's hatred towards the Davy family for reasons we don't yet understand. His presence at God Valley is another one of the flashback's greatest surprises, and we know immediately we're about to witness why Blackbeard has become the Machiavellian he is today. With all these perspectives laid out, the setup becomes very clear. God Valley is not simply the story of one big fight, it's the story of multiple threads clashing into each other at the same time. So if we're answering the question, is the God Valley setup good or bad, meaning the writing, the structure, the way these motivations collide, then I think the answer leans heavily towards good. Because instead of a straightforward heroes versus villains origin story, Oda builds a powder keg where every character's reason for being there makes sense, and everyone else's motive or story is intertwined with someone else's in some way. Once that powder keg is fully assembled, the only thing left is for it to explode. And it's the Celestial Dragons who light the fuse. The moment the native hunt officially begins, the entire island shifts into a nightmare. The scenes are harrowing. People crying as they run, parents desperately trying to shield their babies, a wife begging for her husband not to be killed. Oda has always used these dark, quiet panels to underline the cruelty that exists in life, like the mother in Wano who held a knife over her own child. And God Valley is no exception. One of the most brutal moments comes when parents plead with the Celestial Dragon to save their baby, only for us to see 3 gunshots a panel later, implying a fate far darker than what is shown. And if that level of cruelty wasn't already clear, we see Summers torturing a child on top of a tree surrounded by thorns while the boy's father runs towards him helplessly below. It's an uncomfortable sequence to sit with, the kind of panels that churns your stomach if you linger on them, but that discomfort is exactly the point. If Oda's goal here was to make the reader feel overwhelmed, a sense of unfairness, and genuinely sick at what's happening, then he definitely succeeded, at least for me. This isn't the quiet before the storm where big factions line up to clash. This is cruelty laid bare, and that rawness is what pulls the reader fully into the chaos amongst the big-name pirates that are about to break loose. The Rocks pirates make landfall like a natural disaster. All these big names and future legends just barrel straight through the island, and their involvement is the purest definition of chaotic. They're not a unified crew, they are a disaster cluster. One moment they're arguing amongst themselves, trading insults and snapping at each other, and the very next panel shows them leveling anything in their path together. They aren't here to save innocents or put an end to the hunt. They crash into God Valley with their own individual goals, and the battlefield instantly feels smaller the moment these big personalities arrive. Rocks cut straight through the chaos, not for treasure, devil fruits, or even Shaki, but because his family is somewhere inside this nightmare. There's a desperation to him that none of his crewmates recognize because they don't know the real reason he came to God Valley. Rocks has the most personal motive to move through this chaos. For everyone else, God Valley is a battlefield. For Rocks, it's a burning house with his wife and child trapped inside. Roger's arrival is almost comedic in comparison. His crew storms onto the island with this strange, unshakable confidence that feels feels completely out of sync with the nightmare unfolding around them. Seriously, just look at these faces. And their mission is embarrassingly simple. Get Shucky. I get it, she's their friend and for most of them the object of their deepest affection. The emotional side of that is sincere, but in the grand scheme of everything happening in God Valley, it's kind of hilarious. The stakes here are massive. The cruelty is overwhelming. We're talking about political violence, moral collapse, and personal tragedy. Meanwhile, the Roger pirates show up acting like they've come to party. There's a quick Roger and Whitebeard clash that feels like Oda giving us a small treat, but the real emotional beat is Rayleigh breaking into Shucky's cell, defeating Summers, and telling her he came for her. Once they get Shucky back, their entire involvement basically shifts into a waiting mode, because Roger hasn't stepped into the real fight yet. Once Shucky is safe, Roger immediately orders his crew to loot the island. It's ridiculous, but it's also perfectly them. While the entire island is collapsing under political cruelty, personal vendettas, and world-shifting clashes, Roger is over here treating the world's darkest moment like a pit stop. Garp's arrival is probably even more comedic than Roger's. He isn't here out of duty or honor or any real sense of responsibility. His entire decision-making process is basically just Roger. That's it. And once he lands, he's instantly in throw hands with anybody mode. Oda even gives us that hype moment of 3 future emperors literally running away from him, which is such a perfect Garp flex, it almost overshadows everything else. But the real tension is how Garp would react once he saw the nightmare unfolding on the island. And when he finally steps into the chaos, it becomes painfully clear he walked into something beyond his wildest imagination. And here's where we discover something interesting. Garp is a vice admiral, one of the world's most respected marines. Yet even someone of his stature had no idea this was happening. He did not know that the Celestial Dragons held a regular hunting competition where people were slaughtered like animals. And this fact earns him redemption within the fanbase, because a large part of the community felt like Garp was complicit, fixated on Roger and the pirates under the banner of the Marines despite the horrors his higher-ups are condoning. But God Valley reframes that entire debate. It doesn't necessarily reinvent Garp. We've always known he hated the Celestial Dragons. His refusal to become an admiral had been our biggest hint of that. What it does is reaffirm Garp's character. A man who would not stand for innocents being hunted and killed. A man disgusted by the social hierarchy in which he serves. And this is exactly where Dragon's perspective becomes essential. As a young cadet still believing in the structure of the Marines, he walks into this nightmare expecting order and finds nothing but indifference. He can't even intervene freely. If he's caught helping the victims, his entire platoon would be executed alongside him. Whatever choice he makes, someone's blood ends up on his hands. But even without monstrous strength to change the battlefield completely, Dragon's sense of morality ultimately prevails. He ends up shooting a Celestial Dragon who was about to shoot Kuma and his companions. It's a small moment on a chaotic island, but it becomes his first act of open defiance and the beginning of everything he eventually becomes. Dragon is the emotional center of this entire chaos because he reacts like a human being. He's not a monstrous pirate tearing through the battlefield or a veteran marine out to decimate all pirates in his way. Just a young man who walked into something cruel and tried to save as many innocent people as possible. And through his eyes, Oda shows us just how overwhelming this battlefield really is. There's a moment where Whitebeard and Big Mom tower over him like forces of nature, completely dwarfing him physically and narratively. It reinforces how small Dragon is in this era and how terrifying it must feel to stand in the middle of a clash between monsters while trying to do the right thing. Rox was also confronted with another nightmare, finding his father and grandmother in their demonic Domi-Reversi forms, so Rox was forced to kill them. It's a horrifying moment that adds another layer to the desperation driving him through God Valley as he tries to protect Eris and Teach. Garling, on the other hand, doesn't really earn his reputation during the chaos itself. He thrives when his targets are defenseless, and in that environment he looks unstoppable. But the moment the battlefield pitted him against the real monster, he was a non-factor. Once Rox reaches him, Garling is flattened almost immediately. His army collapses around him, making it clear he isn't built for this tier of combat, and despite whatever damage Garling might have inflicted off-screen, Rox still has enough energy after their brief run-in without showing any sign that Garling slowed him down at all. The chaos of God Valley reaches its peak when all these gigantic personalities, Rox, Roger, Garp, Whitebeard, Whitebeard, Kaido, and Big Mom finally collide in the same place. And the moment they do, Oda drops what is easily one of the best attack panels in the entire series, as Imu takes over Saint Saturn's body to ensure Rox doesn't make it out alive. 6 monsters all attack Imu at once. I love how it's messy, unplanned, and completely instinctive. It's such a raw moment. And alongside this brief but impactful moment of combat is the equally important lore reveals. Exchanges between Imu and Rox sees Imu addressing Rox as Davy Jones, and Rox pushing back, not denying the lineage, but correcting the implication. And then Rox casually drops something huge, the idea that Davy Jones might have been the king of the world before Imu, and on top of that, we get the first real link between Joy Boy and Davy Jones when Rox asks Imu who they're more afraid of. These 2 short lines add huge weight to underscore the chaos. Like there's a whole second story playing beneath the one we're watching. And amidst all of this, Oda sneaks in another beat that will go on to shaping the future of the world even more. Dragon, overwhelmed by the chaos, is forced to drop Shanks. Shanks tumbles towards the treasure chest that will eventually be taken by the Roger pirates, and this closes Dragon and Shanks' big involvement in this part of the story. That thread is tied off so that the focus can shift finally into the last irreversible turn of the incident. Right after the combined attack, Imu responds by Domi reversing Rox, forcing him to try and kill his own family. He lashes out at his own crew. The man who arrived on the island with the most personal goal ends up becoming the greatest threat on the battlefield. And that's the moment the Roger and Garp team up is put to page. So, good or bad? Once the God Valley incident starts, we enter into a brilliant pandemonium. It's moments like this where I really appreciate Oda's ability to weave in so many threads, so many characters to force us to experience a medley soup of emotions. While we may have expected more extended action in a flashback consisting of some of the most biggest names in all of One Piece history, it's not necessary for the story Oda is trying to tell. Instead, we get massive lore drops and character development. We're swept away on a fast-paced but emotionally rich ride that takes us to the climax of the God Valley incident. I am absolutely in love with how we are funneled to the main event. The equal focus on both Roger and Garp, and the way that tension has been building up since chapter 1163, when they first became aware that Imu had taken over Saint Saturn, even if they didn't quite understand what that meant. That was the moment it clicked for me. Oh, it's coming. And then the end of chapter 1164 slammed it home. Roger and Garp tell their men they are staying on the island, and the richness of these Roger and Garp parallels don't stop there. One of my favorite panels in the entire flashback is the moment they each hold a Denden Mushi, telling their crews, promising they'll return. Once the fight actually starts, that equal portrayal continues. Panel after panel, side by side, neither one overshadowing the other. Oda really meant it about these two being rivals, and what I love even more is how in sync they are as they fight alongside each other, but separately. They're not a team, but they don't get in each other's way. Rox is obviously a monster. His strength in base form already puts him above everyone else in the flashback, but that Domi Reversi transformation amplifies him into something literally demonic. The fight itself has everything you would expect from a spectacle, but underneath all of that, it has a strange and almost uncomfortable sense of tragedy. Even though we already knew the ending, that Rox loses, Oda makes it surprisingly hard to accept that outcome emotionally. The flashback treated Rox with so much nuance and humanity that his fall doesn't read like justice, it feels like loss. There's a small part of me desperately hoping that Rox would somehow break free from Imu's control and survive, even though we all knew from the beginning that isn't the case. And then there's that close-up on Rox's face, this man who once towered over the entire era with unmatched willpower, reduced to tears. Like those tears are the last bit of him that could still resist Imu's control. The final flicker of humanity trying to claw its way out before everything collapses. He pleads with his rivals to kill him. It's brutal but beautiful in its own way. Even Roger and Garp didn't want this outcome. But this is where the story was always going to lead. Roger nor Garp wants the rivalry to end like this. Not when their greatest opponent isn't even himself anymore. Not when the only way to stop him is to strike together. Not out of competition, but because they simply have no other choice. They're fulfilling what Rox himself wants. And the significance of this moment moment is punctuated by the fact that Roger and Garp could hear Rox's true feelings through the voice of all things, igniting our lore hunger. And herein also lies the answer to how to combat Imu's overpowered ability, an overwhelming conqueror's haki mass. Not only does the climax of God Valley deliver our long-held questions of why and how Roger teamed up to defeat Rox, we also get the answer to the problems currently facing us in the present timeline. A revelation that, indeed, Imu's powers can be countered, and it doesn't automatically inherently signify death for a Domi Reversi victim, but in the case of Rox, he is tragically finished and off-screen by Garling. So, is the God Valley main event good or bad? Honestly, it lands somewhere in the middle for me. The fight is short, it does its job, we see how the outcome came to be, we understand why Roger and Garp had to team up, and we get the emotional beats that matter. But for something that had been hyped up for years, you could argue that getting such a short sequence was a little underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, I love the fight itself. It still delivers great exchanges, clean, unimprovised teamwork, strong emotional beats. But would an extended fight have helped? I know it wouldn't have hurt. At the same time, I understand why Oda kept it tight. The purpose of this fight is less about suspense and more about inevitability. How we reach the ending we already knew we would get. And it also needed to establish something important for the current Elbaf arc, that Domi Reversi can be reversed and that this ability is central to Imu's power. So for me, the main event is good, but it could have been better and I wouldn't blame anyone for wanting more. Killing Rox off-screen leaves the fanbase with just enough to keep the agenda going. Rox is still alive, and honestly, I love that. Regardless of whether Rox's story is truly over or not, it's a testament to how well Oda has built Rox as a character that we're all secretly hoping it's not over for him yet. Something I did find a little off was how quickly Whitebeard, Kaido, and Big Mom were removed from the equation. While I understand that Rox's attacks were too strong and they were likely blasted away from the epicenter of where this main event was taking place, far enough that they couldn't immediately rejoin the fight. But the idea that they didn't make any effort to return, whether to help their captain or simply to get payback for being attacked, felt strange. With Whitebeard in particular, with the loyalty we see him embody and even displayed by helping Rox against Imu initially, not showing intention to try and reach Rox again is oddly detached. The part that sticks out the most is that none of them, especially Whitebeard, who got an up-close look at demonic Rox, didn't recognize that this wasn't truly Rox anymore. I wouldn't call it a complete deal breaker, but it is one thing that lands a little awkwardly in my opinion. And you can rationalize this from a narrative standpoint. Oda needed them off the board to isolate the promised Roger and Garp versus Rox to take center stage, but it doesn't fully erase the oddness of seeing future emperors effectively abandon their captain at his most crucial moment. When the dust finally settles, Garling is the one who delivers the final blow to a weakened Rox, showing how hollow the title Champion of God Valley really is. Once Rox finally falls and the island-wide clash settles, the story quickly takes us to the aftermath, the part where the dust clears and the consequences start taking shape. The island God Valley starts to disappear, crumbling as a result of the brutal combat that has taken place, and the island itself sinks, wiped clean from the map, from memory, and from historical record. One of the clearest things the flashback does is show us where the Yonko era truly began. Big Mom and Kaido's dynamic, the so-called debt, the resentment, the mismatch between how they interpret loyalty. It's all born right here and it foreshadows their future crews perfectly. Big Mom builds a crew with her family. Kaido builds a meritocracy where power is the only law. You can trace both philosophies directly back to how they operated at God Valley. Whitebeard's trajectory is shaped just as clearly. This is where he takes his first real step towards forming his own crew, meeting Polo, and seeing Whitebeard remain loyal to Rox until the very end fits him completely. He's a man who treats crewmates like family long before he ever called anyone son. God Valley simply confirms that his future as a captain wouldn't be built on fear, competition, or hierarchy. It would be built on family, no second guessing. The Roger pirates finding Shanks might be the most famous consequence of all. The fact that Shanks ended up on Roger's ship accidentally visually, but narratively, it becomes one of the pivotal turns in the entire series. The future man who will stand at the intersection of every major power in the world, being found because Dragon dropped him during the chaos. Garp's choice after the battle carries a different kind of weight. He doesn't leave the Marines after God Valley, even though what he witnessed could have easily broken anyone's faith in the institution like Dragon. Instead, he stays, not for the Celestial Dragons or the institution of the Marines, but for the people at the bottom who are still trying to fight the good fight. The ones who, according to him, need protection. Again, this flashback doesn't seek to revolutionize who Garp is. This is the same vague, complex morality we've come to understand about Garp. And then there's Dragon. Garp freeing his own son from Marine captivity becomes the spark that would eventually light the Revolutionary Army. Unlike his father, Dragon walks away from the Marines with the understanding that the institution he trusted can't be fixed from the inside. So he builds something new. Something that aims directly at the system that produced God Valley in the first place. For all of Dragon's ideals about freedom, it's strangely poetic that his father, the man who fights for others but not himself, is the man who frees him first. The event impacts Elbaf massively as well. Once Rox dies, Harold's grief over losing his friend pushes him into despair, and that despair becomes the reason he agrees to serve the world government. He becomes a slave of Imu's system, a tragic consequence set into motion by the fall of the one person who always believed in him. But perhaps the greatest long-term impact of God Valley is what it does and what it already has done to teach. It doesn't excuse anything he's become, but it finally gives us a frame of reference that humanizes Blackbeard enough for his motivations to make sense. Blackbeard isn't just evil for the sake of being evil. He was a child who survived a level of horror no kid should ever witness, let alone endure. And One Piece has always shown how people fracture differently under trauma. Some, like Kuma or Ivankov, come out of catastrophe with compassion. Others, like Doflamingo, they let the darkness shape them into something unrecognizable. Teach sits somewhere in the middle for now. He isn't redeemed by this flashback, but he is contextualized. God Valley gives us the baseline, the emotional starting point for a character who will eventually become one of the greatest threats in the world. There's clearly still more that will push Teach to become the man we know today, but at the very least, this flashback shows the origin of the wound. So, God Valley, good or bad? After sitting with everything this flashback has given us, the natural question becomes, was the God Valley flashback good or bad in terms of its execution? Did it live up to the years of anticipation, but did the weight of mystery and expectation actually work against it? And honestly, I think the answer lands somewhere more nuanced than just one or the other. On the good side, the structure of the flashback is incredibly strong. Uniquely delivered, God Valley appears inside a flashback layered within another, with Roxy Zebek serving as the narrative thread. His story builds naturally towards God Valley and connects directly with Harold's backstory. Because of that placement, the incident ends up doing several things at once. It gives us our first complete look at Zebek as a character, it reveals the hidden political nature underscoring the God Valley incident, it exposes the extent of the Celestial Dragon's ritualized cruelty, it reframes the unlikely alliance between Roger and Garp, and it ties together various lingering threads in a way that reinforces long-standing themes in the series. Those themes of inherited will, chosen family, dreams, and destiny. Every character who matters has a clear motivation that collides with someone else's in a meaningful way. For a story juggling this many legends, so many characters at once, it is surprisingly coherent. And I think the inclusion of Kuma alongside the other many characters I didn't actually focus on in this video is the best example of that. There are so many moving pieces in this flashback. Captain John, Shiki, Ganzui, some Easter egg characters and others, and yet their involvement never feels confusing or out of place. I chose to stick with the bigger names just for clarity and brevity, but it's worth acknowledging how well Oda wove the rest of them into this larger event. The same goes for Kuma. I didn't go into his involvement in the incident in this video because his story was already told to us in isolation, and we've seen his entire involvement in God Valley in far more detail than other characters. But we do get additional scenes of Kuma's role during this flashback, one of which reveals that he's ultimately the one who saved Eris and Teach, which is a huge piece of this incident. But if I try to fold all of that into this particular breakdown, Kuma would naturally become the emotional center of every section, just because his story carries so much much weight. So for this video, I kept the focus narrow, but my take on Kuma remains the same. His role in God Valley is one of the strongest, most complete threads Oda has ever written, my forever MVP. The emotional clarity of the fights is another huge win. Roger and Garp are portrayed as equal in a way that the series has never committed to before, and it has me even more intrigued about the history between these two. Meanwhile, the tragedy of Rox, a man who wasn't at all evil, but someone who tragically lost control over his own will, yet another would-be could-be Joy Boy, or in Rox's case, the next Davy Jones. It adds another layer of humanity to a character who was initially presented as just a monster. And the flashback also plants seeds for everything that defines the Yonko era, the Revolutionary Army, Shanks and Blackbeard's destiny, Elbaf's trauma, and the current Imu conflict. As a historical turning point, it genuinely earns its importance. The flashback serving as this treasure trove of lore, huge reveals that contribute to so much of the characterization and future story developments, which is always the primary purpose of Oda's flashback, and yet also in classic One Piece fashion, there is a lot left unanswered, or at least only partially answered, and this constant mystery is something I now appreciate, and hopefully we're all accustomed to by now. But there is also a side of the flashback that feels compressed, especially when it comes to the main event. The fight between Roger, Garp, and Rox was undoubtedly great. The choreography, the emotional beats, the sky-splitting clash. But it's shorter than what years of build-up might have led people to expect. It doesn't ruin the experience, and the point was clearly to show how the fight happened rather than build the suspense around the outcome, but an extended sequence to show more of Roger and Garp's individual abilities wouldn't have hurt. There's also a sense that certain moments could have breathed for a little longer, particularly Rox's transformation and the emotional fallout of his breakdown. The story hits all the beats it needs to, but parts of it move so fast that some readers may feel like they only got the highlights instead of a fully layered, drawn-out battle. So overall, I would say the flashback is undeniably good, with some understandable limitations. It accomplishes an enormous amount in a relatively short span of chapters. It clarifies mysteries while leaving room for more, deepens legends, reshapes how we see characters and entire groups of characters, and sets up the present-day story in ways that we're only beginning to understand. But at the same time, it's fair to want more. More pages, more clashes, more room for emotional swings. This is one of the most important events in One Piece history. Wanting an extra chapter or two to sit inside this piece of monumental history is only natural. Still, what we got is incredibly meaningful, coherent, emotionally sharp, and thematically rich. It may not be perfectly perfect, but it's certainly delivered, and I would unequivocally say that the God Valley incident has cemented its place as one of the most important, most defining flashbacks of the series. And those are just some of my thoughts on the God Valley incident flashback. Let me know what you think by leaving a comment below.